Hello, my name is Michael, and I'm gay. And I grew up in the Cumberland Presbyterian Church and was ordained by the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in 1997, a year after the 1996 statement on homosexuality, which called homosexuality a sin and said that the church should not condone the ordination of gay and lesbian people. I grew up in a small church in rural Tennessee, in East Tennessee, and I had a very positive church experience growing up. I felt very loved by the church, and I went to church every Sunday. I sat on the front row. I think my parents had me do that so me and my sister wouldn't get in trouble, and we went to all the vacation Bible schools and participated in the church plays. And I preached my first sermon during Youth Sunday. And later on, I went to CPYC and felt the call to ministry there. I had a lot of positive experiences in the church growing up. Everything was going along great until I guess I hit puberty around 11 or 12, and I started to experience same-sex attraction, and I was devastated. I don't really remember if my church, what they had to say about homosexuality specifically. I don't remember any specific sermon or class or discussion on it, but somehow I knew that it was a sin, and it was one of the worst sins, and it was a sin that would send you to hell. And I didn't know what to do. I remember Mom. She noticed that I'd become very, very melancholy at the time, and she asked me, "What's going on?" And I couldn't tell her. I needed somebody to talk to, but I didn't have anybody to talk to. And I thought if I told her, she would be devastated because her son was going to go to hell. And I didn't want to do that to her. So I decided not to tell her, and I decided to, try to just live the best life I could. And and save her from knowing that her son was going to go to hell until after, after this life. So that was a lot for a 11 or 12-year-old kid, I think, to be going through. And I think the teaching on homosexuality, the belief that it is a sin, that the practice of homosexuality is a sin, is a very harmful belief. It left me despairing. I went from being a happy kid to a very sad kid. And in fact, I really gave up on living there for a while. I actually started to look for ways to sort of end it. And, I told this story to someone else, and they said, "Oh yeah, everybody wants to end it at one time or the other." And it was just, we all have those thoughts, but this was persistent. And I was actually, looking for ways to complete it. And the reason I tell this story is not for sympathy, but because I know that kids are still going through this in the church. I was reading a researcher on suicide. Can't think of his name right now, but he was saying that the church is an antidote to suicide, that involvement in the church, participation in the church, that those who do that have lower levels of suicide. And the problem, though, is for LGBT people, it's sort of the opposite. We actually have higher levels, and it's due to the rejection. There's research from the Family Acceptance Project. They actually went in and looked at rejecting behaviors, and rejecting behaviors could be, telling your child that being gay is a sin is one example, or telling them that you're going to kick them out of the house unless, they, give up the homosexuality. So what they did was they looked at those rejecting behaviors, and they researched a number of families, and they found that the more rejecting behaviors, the stronger the rejection, the more harm that came to that child. So those children would experience higher rates of homelessness, more substance use and abuse. They would experience anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. And all that's from rejection. So it's important how we respond to LGBT people in the church, and calling LGBT people sin, or acting on being LGBT a sin. That is a rejecting behavior, and it does harm to people. And sometimes people stay in the closet because they don't want to deal with that rejection, so they try not to tell anyone. I was watching the news the other night, and they were saying that it was 12 years that are taken off of a life from the stress of hiding one's LGBTQ identity. 12 years it's taken off of a life. So it's not just like something we're debating theologically that's in our heads. These statements have real life consequences. So we should be very careful about what we're saying. And I feel like the church isn't very hospitable to LGBT people, and therefore a lot of LGBT people leave the church. And so then it sort of creates sort of a toxic cycle, because when you're not around LGBT people and you don't know them, and they're not a part of your life, then it's easy to sort of misunderstand who they are, and it's easier to believe the stereotypes and that we've heard about gay people. Me, I was just a kid who loved God. I loved the church, and I got a calling to ministry as well, and faith was like probably the most important thing in my life. In fact, it was faith in Jesus that got me through that sort of that suicidal ideation there. And I turned to him in prayer, and Jesus truly was my best friend during that period. And I remember the pastor preaching the sermon about letting Jesus come into your heart, and that he loved you like nobody else could. And I believe that, and I experienced it. And so it was easy for me to have faith in Jesus. And I still follow Jesus to this day, and I'm still a Christian, and I'm still gay. I did spend about 15 years after I first started feeling same-sex attraction. Spent about 15 years trying to change it, trying to, I went into therapy. I became a psychology student thinking, maybe some of these things in psychology could help me. I initiated my sort of own program to try to change myself to either become straight or celibate. I dated a woman, and I think a professor had advised me that if you just go ahead and get married and it'll all work out. And I contemplated that, I considered it, but I just thought this isn't going to work, and I can't do this to her. I considered her a friend, and I thought that's not going to end well. I knew it wouldn't. So I didn't go that far as marriage, fortunately for me and for her. It's interesting because I felt loved by God, by Jesus. I felt loved by my family. I felt loved by the church, but also I knew that I was gay on some level. I didn't accept it at first. I rejected it. I can, condemned it. I thought it was a sin. I tried to change it, but I didn't let everybody know about it because I didn't think they would understand. And mostly what I was hearing was condemnation anyway, and that wasn't really very helpful to me. I already heard enough of that. So basically I lived for a long time with this fear, this reality of love, but also feeling like that love could be pulled away. Like if I came out to my family, would they still accept me? Would my church still accept me? And I just sort of held both of those, the love and the possibility of losing that love together for a long time. I went to Bethel and had a really good experience there. We had our weekly chapel services and Vespers and Bible studies, and I was very involved in the Diaconoi, the Christian service organization, and I even started a Christian group while I was on campus there, the Christian Issues organization. We would look at Christian issues from a Christian perspective or Christian perspectives, and that was actually part of the process, was learning that a lot of times there's more than one perspective, more than one Christian perspective on issues. And of course, that's what we see on the issue of LGBT people in the church today. It was actually in college and seminary, my mind opened up quite a bit as far as hearing other perspectives. And I realized that not all Christians condemned LGBT people. And some Christians saw the differences as just part of God's creation. When I went to seminary, I took a class in biblical interpretation. That really opened up to me the Bible in a new way. And the course didn't really say this is the one way of interpreting the Bible, but it showed how Christians interpret the Bible in different ways. So just seeing that and seeing that the way that I was accustomed to wasn't the only way, and that proof texting was very problematic and not the best way to interpret the Bible, and that we needed to look at the socio-political context to really understand a passage and the history. I began to see that those texts that are commonly used to condemn LGBT people, they really didn't seem to be talking about same-sex love at all. They were really talking about abuse or, slavery, some kind of power dynamics over people under them who were trafficked, I guess, is what the word we might use today. So at the end of seminary, I was completing my round of Christian therapy, which I was hoping would, help me deal with my sexuality and hopefully bring me into conformity with the majority view and help me so that I could just go on and do my ministry that I felt called to do. And I wanted to see what the Bible had to really say and what God really had to say on the issue of sexuality. And what I finally concluded after 15 years of trying to change is that God wasn't really interested in changing my sexual orientation, or and he wasn't requiring me to be celibate either. In Genesis, when it talks about the creation of humanity and God looks at Adam and says, it's not good for man to be alone. Um, that applies to me, and that applies to a lot of other LGBT people too. We need to be in relationships, and we don't want to spend our lives alone. And I hope that the church will consider that when they're, writing and voting on statements on sexuality and our policies and so forth. So after I was ordained, I moved to San Francisco and I started serving the Cumberland Chinese Church. And I've really loved the church and the people. I had spent some time in Hong Kong, just a month as an English teacher through the denominational program. And I really loved that and learned so much about the culture. And the church was very hospitable to me while I was there, and all the missionaries. And so I was really happy for the opportunity to serve at Cumberland Chinese. I actually moved to San Francisco with a boyfriend that I had met in Memphis, after completing seminary. He was from Taiwan, and we moved to San Francisco together, and I started attending the church right off, and I looked for ways that I could become involved. And so I started teaching English in the English tutorial ministry. And I continued to do that for a while until I became aware that the church wasn't very affirming of LGBT people. The California was putting on the ballot the definition of marriage to be defined as between a man and a woman. And I remember the church called, all of the members of the tutorial ministry together and basically gave them a sample ballot and told them how to vote. And it wasn't in an affirming way. But I was really surprised. I was fresh out of seminary, and I thought there would be like a little more discussion. In seminary, you sort of look at different sides, different Christian perspectives, as in there's not just one. And there's some respect for differences. So I was devastated because I thought this means that the church is saying that I can't be in a relationship. I can't marry the person that I'm in love with. And I came out to my co-teacher, and one thing led to another. I eventually left because I felt that I wouldn't be supported as a gay person. I remember one of the members of the staff said he didn't support women in ministry. So I thought, oh, if they can't support women in ministry, and I know this wasn't everyone, but I thought, how are they going to accept me? And it felt like there was no place for me anymore. It was really a devastating time in my life because I felt like I was losing my church family. I mean, I believed it when the church said, we're your family, we're your sisters and brothers in Christ. I believed it. And then, but suddenly, this part that I'm gay, I'm no longer part of the family. I'm doomed to hell. And it was for something that, I just want to be clear. I didn't choose to be gay. I didn't choose same-sex attraction. It was something I never wanted. I wouldn't have chose. I was on the path. They said, "Oh, this is the golden boy. A young, up-and-coming young minister. You're going to do great things in the denomination." But I'm gay, so that's sort of canceled that. But so I left the church there, and I but I continued to do ministry. I started hosting Bible studies in my home for other LGBT Christians. And there was a member of the church's staff there. They have a Chinese school, and she was a teacher there, and she was a lesbian. And she and I began leading these Bible studies and faith sharing gatherings. And basically, we looked at some of those clobber passages that were used against gay people, and we looked at more affirming interpretations of those passages. I mean, we really realized that those passages had been so misused. They didn't really say what people think they say. I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah, that's not really talking about same-sex love at all. It's a rape of a visitor to the city of angels. This is a same-sex love between human beings. So I continued that ministry for about 10 years. I guess in 2015, marriage equality was coming before the Supreme Court, and there was a lot of debate in the Cumberland forums about marriage equality, and I participated in some of that discussion and tried to add my experience as a gay man who had been ordained by the church. And it was greeted with some degree of judgment and condemnation. I was sort of shocked by how harsh it was. But I did hear, I did get some support from other ministers who thought some of the statements were going too far. And, because it still hurts to hear condemnation, no matter how old you are, coming from your church, the church that you grew up in, the church that you still love. So what I realized through that, that in these forums, either like the denominational forums where they said they weren't really set up to have these kind of discussions, and some of the other forums that were led by members, there just couldn't be like a reasonable discussion. And there were folks who wanted to discuss, well, look, marriage equality was approved by the Supreme Court. It was recognized as fundamental right. Given that reality, how is the church going to minister in all the communities that the church is in to people who are in same-sex relationships, who are married in same-sex marriages, and they have children? How's the church going to respond? We needed a place where we could discuss that without just all the condemnation and the cries of heresy or apostasy or whatever. So I created a forum called Welcoming Cumberland Presbyterians, and after talking to a few ministers, and that was almost 6 years ago, and it's still going today. We have about a couple hundred members in the forum, and we have a public page as well of about, I think there's about 800 people on there. And the goal of the public page is just to share a witness of love and inclusion, to say, like what our confession of faith says: we embrace you. We embrace all kinds of people in the church. And we're really trying to live out that embrace in Welcoming Cumberland Presbyterians. When I was ordained, I really understood it as a ministry of reconciliation. And that's reconciliation between us and God and us and one another. Our confession of faith says that we should seek to break down all the barriers that exist between peoples, nations, races, all groups of people. And so I think that's really one of the goals of Welcoming Cumberland Presbyterians, is to help the church see us as people, to reconcile with the church, to know who we are, but also to provide a space of love and support for LGBTQ folks. Having grown up in the church and knowing what it's like in some parts of the church to experience judgment. I don't want other kids to go through that. I don't want other kids who may become, have suicidal thoughts because they're told they're going to be going to hell. I don't want them to feel alone. And that's like one of my primary motivations behind the group, is just so people don't feel like they're alone. Almost everyone who's come to the ministry of Welcoming Cumberland Presbyterians, they said they thought they were the only one. And that's what's so shocking about it. We're sort of forced into closets because there's so much judgment. And all we really want to do is serve the church. We want to love and live our lives and serve the church. And unfortunately, these rules and condemnations get in the way of that. And I wanted to share a little story about my grandmother, May. She lived 100 years old. She passed away just a few years ago. She was a faithful Cumberland Presbyterian. Her husband, my grandfather, was on the church's committee to rebuild the church. And I remember growing up, I saw his name on the cornerstone of the church. Of course, we always knew Jesus was the true cornerstone, but I saw my grandfather's name there. And he passed away when I was young, so I didn't really know him. But when I was in seminary, I went to visit Grandma, and I was talking to her about my call and, what I wanted to do in ministry. And she told me a story about when my Aunt Brenda was born and when the preacher came to visit. And see, my Aunt Brenda was born with severe disabilities, and she ended up spending her life in a wheelchair. And the preacher, when he came to visit, Mama said that he asked her, what sin are you guilty of that God would curse you with this child? And I thought, what? And he didn't come to offer his support or pastoral care, so to speak. He came to get a confession from her, I guess to get her to repent so that, she could live a better life henceforth and be free of God's curses. But what my grandmother said to him was, Brenda is a blessing, not a curse. And of course, she showed him out after that. But he wasn't really welcome, from what I understand back. But Grandma and Brenda were very close, and I was very close to Grandma and Brenda, and I miss them very much. But I think the reason Mama told me that story when I was, talking about going into ministry was, one, I think she wanted someone to witness what she had gone through on behalf of a minister, but also to sort of let me know what kind of minister she didn't want me to be. And but also the lesson I take from that story is that sometimes our beliefs can get in the way of love. They can get in the way of caring. And at a moment like when my grandmother needed people to be there for her, that minister could not see her because he could only see sin. He had sin on his mind. What sin was she guilty of that God would curse her with this child? But I always remember what my grandmother said: she's a blessing, not a curse. And I believe that LGBT people are blessings to the church too, and we shouldn't let our theology, our beliefs get in the way of seeing LGBT people as human beings. Instead of making statements about our sinfulness, or condemning us to hell, or excluding us from the church or from doing ministry, what if the church made a commitment to love, to listen, to try to understand? to be in relationship. That's what we're called to do, to be the body of Christ, all of us, one another, and all of our differences. Some differences you might consider imperfections or whatever those differences are. I think we're meant to show love, and those differences are beautiful. My aunt, she, the word disabled is one way of describing her, but she was so much more than that. And one of her gifts, I think her vocation was prayer. She spent a lot of time in prayer. She was always praying for family members, and she was very loving. And I'm very happy that I knew her. And I hope that the church will consider the LGBTQ people who are members of the church, not as problems, but as people to get to know, people to get to love. Thank you.